to you that is an attack for democracy?
It is, I think, because elections are central and election integrity is central to democracy. And he has been fighting, sometimes a lonely fight along those lines. Furthermore, there's an issue of the dojang, the election, the personal stamp. And that needs to be put on by the election monitors, the election manager for each precinct, their personal one with their own name on it, so that they can verify that the ballot is valid. But if there's a pre-printed one or a generic one that doesn't have the specific name of the manager of that precinct, then how can the people trust that this is a valid ballot? Then there could just be unlimited numbers of invalid ballots that are used if there is not the personal stamp and the personal accountability that comes with that. And this is required by the Public Official Election Act, which is the national law. And it's not superseded by the regulations under that or by some contract that is illegally against the law.
Korean election, which cause us to consider this election to be an illegitimate one. This is a particularly essential time in U.S. South Korean elections. Yesterday, as has been mentioned, was the 75th anniversary of the start of the Korean War when North Korea attacked South Korea. This was a war in which over 1 million South Korean civilian and military casualties occurred, killed, wounded, and missing. And it was also a war in which over 100,000 Americans were either killed or wounded in that war. So at a time of solemn reflection, as we consider the sacrifices made by the South Korean and American people, it's important to consider the actions of the Chinese Communist Party in influencing this election and the behavior in particular of the South Korean National Election Commission, which has been stressed by my colleagues, and rightfully so. The NEC is not transparent. Its problems are profound, and its behavior de facto breaks the contract between the people and government, which is the hallmark of Western democratic systems. The NEC is not transparent in any respect, nor is it accountable to the South Korean government or any other body, international or obviously within South Korea itself. The NEC will not permit an audit of their servers. It will not permit an audit of their software, of their processes, or of their computer equipment. Early voting, as has been mentioned, and as seen in the video that we saw, and that will be discussed in a moment in more detail by our South Korean colleagues. In early voting, there were many irregularities. Some of my colleagues have mentioned those, and including evidence of double voting and proxy voting, abnormal ballot papers, mismanagement of ballot boxes, irregularities in the vote counting process, and anomalies in overseas voting, to just list a few of really what is a rogues gallery of gross and fundamental problems in the South Korean election. There were gross irregularities in voting, in early voting, and on voting on election day. Any investigative agency must examine NEC servers and computer equipment in this election, which is part of a broader pattern of behavior in earlier elections, as has been mentioned in 2020, and 2022, and 2024. Transparency is essential for any legitimate democratic government and for the social contract to obtain. When that is eroded, of course, then, of course, the fabric of society, the fabric of democracy begins to wear and to unravel. And the consequences of that, of course, are grave for every democratic society. Therefore, I call on an investigative body to examine these issues and for the NEC and the South Korean government to provide full cooperation to address this issue. The NEC must be reformed to require transparency in all elections, and that has to be supported by the South Korean government, as well as governments around the world and people of goodwill around the world who support democracy wherever it exists. If we do not have that, we run the risks of eliding slowly or perhaps far more rapidly into a totalitarian government. The path to authoritarianism, the path to in essence, a form of totalitarian control, as witnessed in North Korea, of course, and in the People's Republic of China. So the stakes are grave. The matter is immediate and must be addressed. And I'm very pleased, again, to have been joined by such outstanding colleagues to have the opportunity to address this issue, and to have great thanks, of course, to the National Press Club for hosting us for this occasion. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.
Brad, thank you so much for pointing out what is at stake. We're talking not just about one election in June in one country in South Korea, but we're talking about the erosion of democratic norms and the erosion of democracy itself. And as Brad just told us, what's at stake is the slide to both authoritarianism and even totalitarianism. Because we know that many of Yi's advisors do believe in North Korean norms. In other words, totalitarianism. Thank you so much, Brad.
I've been looking at Korean elections actually since 2020, not just this last one. I was asked to go look at the 2020 general election because there had been allegations of fraud, and I was glad to go, and I didn't expect I would find anything. Like a lot of Americans my age, we know that elections sometimes have surprise outcomes. Once I started looking in very short order, I realized that there was something really wrong that had happened in South Korea, that in all likelihood the 2020 election had been stolen. And I have seen nothing in subsequent elections in 2022, 2024, and this most recent one to change my mind. You've seen the same things happen. Now, when I showed up in 2020, one of the people I talked to was the head of South Korea's equivalent of MIT. And he had looked at the statistical outcomes of the election. He said, look, either God did it or it was rigged. And this is someone immensely respected, knows his subject, and that's what he's saying. And at that point, you sit up and you start taking this very seriously. Additionally, there were claims of electronic manipulation, and to include the existence of Chinese parts in the NEC's computer networks. And the response from the National Election Commission was, it's irrelevant and our system can't be hacked. Well, fast forward to 2023, and the South Korean National Intelligence Service investigates the NEC's networks because North Korea's Lazarus Group had hacked it over the last couple years. And the South Korean NIS looks at it and read their report. You can do anything you want in that system to manipulate, to rig an election. I really encourage people to read that report. And 3 years earlier, the NEC had said, can't be hacked, and it's all irrelevant. Well, that suggests some real problems. The leftists get huge amounts, the conservatives get very little. And on election day, it's reversed. What I was told was, well, it's because most young people support the leftists and they vote early, and most old people support the conservatives, and because they're conservatives, they vote on election day. However, at that time, the NEC, the government's official statistics showed that a majority of old people had voted on early voting day. And at this point, you're starting to think this is really problematic. And the facts were leading me to think that it had been rigged. And there's nothing I've seen ever since then to suggest otherwise. You see the pristine ballots that look like they just came out of the printing machine, already marked for one candidate for Lee. You see voting stations where votes are being cast at every 4.7 seconds. And in some cases, it's even faster. Now try to explain that away. You have more votes than voters who walked in, and you have citizens who are out there counting people going into the polling sites, and then you look at the NEC's official announcements. Well, that causes you some real concerns, and well, it should. You've seen the video of 3,000 plus votes all coming out on the tabulating machine for Lee, for the Democratic Party's candidate. Now, what do you say about that?